How is India? How are things in India at the moment?
To start with, it's really hot.
Oh,
It's like 42 degrees where I am right now.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy. And that's 42 C, not 42 Fahrenheit. So that's quite hot.
oh God.
Very hot.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool. We don't get that anywhere near that in the UK, as I'm sure you're well aware. Fab. So
Absolutely. I'm glad you don't get that.
yeah, so am I. So am I. I mean, it occasionally here hits 30 and the whole world goes insane and everyone becomes incapable of doing anything and no one has aircon anywhere. So it does become quite impossible, but it doesn't happen very often.
So we're going to have like 42 for the next 2 months, 60 days flat. It's going to be crazy.
Wow.
And do you like fully organized with climate, what is it, climate machines or climate thingies in the hospital? Because our hospital would like crush if we had like 40 degrees.
Yeah.
So yeah, hospitals obviously got temperature controlled somewhere close to 25, 20 something. So, but once you step out, the temperature difference hits you, and that's
Yeah.
good. That's good. I mean, you dread getting out. Keeps me in the hospital for long.
Yeah, wow. Great. So should we crack on? Do you want to start by telling us a bit about your like growing up in India, how you came to go to medical school and become interested in hematology, I suppose?
Sure. So basically, I grew up in Bombay, Mumbai, basically. That's where I did my entire schooling, my basic junior college and med school, as well as my internal medicine residency. So that's close to 26 years of life in Bombay. Post which I came to this place called Lucknow, which is in Uttar Pradesh. That's where I am right now in my final year of hematology and oncology fellowship. So this is an institute, basically, it's a tertiary care center dealing predominantly with heme malignancies, not so much of solid malignancies exposure. It's predominantly heme and heme-onc. So that's about the start of it. Like growing up in Bombay was something which I would say I'm quite lucky to have done that, because everything was like, close by, and med school was something which was, I don't know, it was not meant to happen per se, I thought. Nobody in my family is remotely into medicine. They're all into law and stuff like that. But yeah, that's how it went by.
And what would you say influenced you to decide to go for hematology?
So this is a little bit of a personal thing per se, because when I was growing up and I got into med school, my dad was detected with chronic myeloid leukemia. This was way back in 2008. So we just had imatinib. I believe that was the story in the whole of the world. So unfortunately, he didn't quite make it. He had a primary resistant disease to imatinib. We didn't have any sort of testing available. So it was either imatinib or it was interferon. So 4 months into imatinib is when he progressed to accelerated phase and then blast crisis. And I had no clue what all is happening. I barely went to the hospital. I couldn't see him in that state. So the initial few months when he was on imatinib were like smooth. It was great. So I thought, okay, this is so cool. You're actually controlling a malignancy with a single drug. And that's what imatinib was, like a true wonder drug, I would say. But once, I realized that, okay, there is a lot of stuff beyond it. And that triggered my interest in hemat. And then he was taken up for a bone marrow transplant, a matched sibling donor. That's when, I was like, okay, we can cure malignancies with someone else's bone marrow. I mean, I thought, okay, that's not possible. I was like a lowly first year med school student, so don't judge me here. I was like, okay, that's quite cool. And this is something that I would love to do if, I am given a chance. Come second year, pathology and Robbins triggered my interest in heme further. Ended up reading more and more heme. And that's when I decided I'm either going to be a pediatrician or I'm going to do internal medicine, because the ultimate goal was hematology. So yeah, that's how I ended up in hematology.
Oh, wow. And how does medical training work in India? So after med school, do you make a choice between what you go into then, or do you get a chance to rotate through different things, do a little bit of a few things before having to decide ultimately what you want to go into?
Okay, so how it works is we start off with med school, which is post our 12 standard exams, or the junior college as we call it. So med school is somewhere around 5.5 years. We call it MBBS. I believe it's the same in UK, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So that's 5.5 years. That's including a 1-year rotatory internship, wherein you rotate through 3 months in medicine, 3 months in surgery, a month and a half in pediatrics, and 2 months in gynecology, stuff like that. And so the post which you appear for a all India exam, basically that's like a sort of an entrance exam, wherein close to around 100,000 or 200,000 students appear, or med students appear.
Wow.
And so you've got close to maybe 10,000 seats. So it's like a 1 in 10 ratio of getting in. And that includes all your, non-government schools and your private sector schools, which are not so sought after. So you want to get into a government funded institute because of 2 reasons: the patient load, and that's where you're going to be actually learning. And also it's much more economic. So government school is 3 years of internal medicine residency, wherein you rotate through, bigger specialties like cardiology and nephrology and neurology. But I don't think there's any sort of exposure to hem-onc, like maybe like a 10 or 15 day rotation through the hem-onc unit, if at all, and absolutely no exposure to transplants. I mean, so that's like a distant dream during internal medicine residency. It's quite heavy, so it's not that you feel that you want to rotate. The only thing you want to do is get home, crash.
And what would you say is in India like the biggest difference? I don't know. Have you ever been to Europe or the US?
Not for medical training. I've been otherwise. I haven't been exposed to the healthcare in Europe and US. So I'm not really, I won't be able to draw comparisons.
Because it's just for India, for me personally, it's just a constant feeling of being overwhelmed, because because you just said you have 200,000 medical students. This is just completely blowing my mind here in Germany. What would you say are, like, in your experience, the biggest differences, challenges you would say we need to understand if we talk about India, healthcare in general, education?
So as you said, the sheer number, it's quite overwhelming, as you rightly put it. So it's basically like a struggle for existence. When you're a med student, you feel you've put in 5.5 years of hard work, and you find yourself nowhere. Post which, the struggle to get into med school, to get into a decent residency program begins. To bring out all the bias and everything associated with the interviews, we've done away with that. It's more of a multiple choice question based entrance exam, wherein you crack it. So it's, everything is like, make or break on one particular day. That itself is quite overwhelming. You being judged on an exam that's going to last just 3 hours. So a lot of good people, a lot of, strong candidates will not make it. Some people are not so good at solving multiple choice questions. Some people might just not be doing so good that day. So that's one huge barrier. And I don't think that that's the best way to get into a residency program, but well, that's how it is. Once you get into residency, again, it's the sheer volume, the patient load. So I think it's something that teaches us as well. I mean, if you survive med school or residency in India, I think that you're sorted. I mean, you can probably work your way and work it up in some other country. Maybe it's going to not be so difficult in terms of putting in the hours. So what we are not so exposed to during our residency tenure is something like clinical research. Data keeping is quite poor. A lot of places would not have electronic medical records. It's still some handwritten notes, even in like metro cities. So because even if you have an EMR, you don't have the time to enter in the data, the patient notes. It's just about the number of admissions in each emergency. 24-hour emergency, we would admit close to 120 patients and have an OPD of close to 700 to 800 patients. So that's a general medicine OPD. Again, overwhelming numbers, impossible to enter records, keep any sort of data. So that is one huge, disadvantage, I would say, that Indian medical trainees have. I mean, the intricacies of clinical trials or something is you learn to dig it out only during your fellowship days and not during your internal medicine residency. And I think that's a wee bit late, maybe 3 years too late compared to the West.
But I guess, like, on the opposite hand, just the sheer volume of clinical experience. I mean, you guys must have, and speaking to colleagues, like fellows I've worked with who've come over from India, there's not like they've seen everything, and often multiple times as well, because I don't think there can't quite be anything that prepares you for dealing with something than having had to deal with it. Especially when you've got a clinic full of so much stuff, just having to make decisions and things.
Yeah. So as you said, obviously it's all going to have it's the other side of the coin. On the flip side, obviously that's amazing to have that sort of clinical exposure. You start doing things at a spinal level, doing 15 lumbar punctures in one single night in the ERS itself. You see 3 patients with tubercular meningitis just walk, just being wheeled in. So the sheer volume teaches you to do things at a spinal level. And yeah, that's like a huge positive. I mean, the patient load, the patient spectrum. And we worked up a lot of hem-onc cases during our medicine training itself without actually knowing what we were dealing with.
And how do the numbers vary? So when you do come to like specialized downs to work in like heme as a specialty or transplant, what sort of numbers are we talking there? And if there is such thing as a typical unit, I mean, I'm guessing.
So it's a huge difference actually. The institute where I did my residency from, my internal medicine residency, was like a busy center in Bombay. Bombay is again like a tertiary care center for most of the state and even for a lot of other cities around. So the numbers obviously aren't comparable. And secondly, we working currently in the hem-onc unit, we take patients only by referral. So that reduces the number of walk-ins. There's no concept of, a walk-in patient. It's only by referral. So the numbers are quite controlled, and that's how we're going to be able to deliver some sort of quality, because it's not always going to be about quantity when it comes to hem-onc. So on a typical OPD day out here, we'd have close to, again, 50 new patients, 50 new hem-onc patients, and close to 200 or 250 follow-up patients. So that would be like including our patients who are on chemotherapy for ALL and AMLs and whatever CMLs. We have dedicated OPDs 3 times a week, Mondays being for aplastic anemias and MPNs. Wednesday is a dedicated CML day, and Friday we have just myelomas and other plasma cell disorders. So those are the days. The numbers are not restricted, so it even reaches close to 300 myeloma patients on a Friday.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is give me just this hour for our conversation to realize what you always just say. But let's come back to you. When we said that there's a lot of potential for seeing a lot of diseases, and when one follows you, for instance, on Twitter, I think me personally, I'm quite overwhelmed with your vast like experience you put out there and the questions surrounding many diseases, etc. I think that's a really advantage and a really beautiful opportunity you just realize on Twitter to educate people, and especially trainees. But when it comes to you, do you have like a specialty, or are you just a general hematologist?
So there's we've got units and we've got attendings who are specializing in different diseases like myelomas and lymphomas, and we don't have units per se. We rotate through all of them, and we are expected to attend all the OPDs. So that's how it works. I mean, as a trainee, you're exposed to all of it, and it's not like something that you specialize in. So that would be an advanced fellowship post your 3 years of DM, as we call it. So that's a doctorate in medicine. So I'm in my final year of that. So no particular specialization. It's all of hem-onc. We see almost everything as trainees.
And do you have any particular interest or anything that you might want to specialize into, or?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm highly, motivated to do transplants, and fortunately, I've been, I've applied for a fellowship to Princess Margaret, and I've been accepted there. So I start in 2023, August. So yeah, that's next year, 15 months to go. So allogenic transplant and CAR-T is something which I really would be, interested to bring to India. CAR-T is like in its infancy in India. Just a few centers offering it on a trial basis, like pilot projects, like 6 patients, 10 patients. A huge potential, a huge population, and like a huge unmet need when it comes to, especially like ALLs and patients with DLBCLs and stuff like that, because there's no way that we're going to be able to afford stuff like the research products. I mean, we have to make it in-house, and this is something which is really going to grow leaps and bounds in the coming years. So that was one reason I applied for the fellowship.
So you think like new therapies that would be, because you said about you said it's affording new therapies is quite a challenge in India, many depending on the area you live in. But you think that cellular therapies, for instance, CAR-T, you will focus on trying to really produce them by yourself and not buying something like Axicell or T-cell or something like that?
That's going to be a huge problem, because the cost of these therapies is going to be beyond the average patient population. I mean, it's not going to work out. So in-house CAR-T is something that's going to be like the way to go forward in India, at least. I'm really new into this field. I don't know how this entire thing works. I'm going to explore more of it during my fellowship days. But that's the long-term plan. I mean, get a basic hang of heme right now and specialize in that.
And how does funding work in India for just like for a typical patient who needed a transplant, I don't know, for high risk AML or something? How would the funding work?
So that's 2 sets of patient populations. So if you're walking into a government center, that's because probably, you're not insured, and you don't have the means to afford healthcare in the private sector. So in the private sector, it's completely different. You've got people who are insured under private schemes and everything like that. So that's a different thing. The center which I'm working at, we predominantly work on a lot of government funding and help through the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister fund. So that's how most of the funding works, and the rest of it is out of pocket. So that's the biggest challenge. I mean, the patient is paying for his own therapy, and that's never going to be enough with the kind of drugs that we're dealing with. Affording 3 mg per kg nivolumab is not going to be possible for an average Indian. So it's a different ball game altogether when it comes to reading the trials and actually bringing it to the patient.
And what proportion of the population would rely on that government like funding as opposed to a proportion of the population who would have access to the private and be insured? Do you know?
So I can just put across some random numbers. I don't have the source for this, but if you walk into a government center, then that's close to like 80% of the patients are going to be relying on a government fund. Wherein if you're going into and walking into a private healthcare sector, like a private hospital, then you're probably, not going to be relying on any sort of fund. You'll be insured or you'll have the means to afford therapy. So it's a completely different game. When if you walk into a government center, you're definitely going to depend on the government fund, which is not so difficult to get. Actually, a lot of people do get the funding, and that is how we have been able to, provide even novel agents for disease like Hodgkin's, and we are using a lot of venetoclax for AML, and that's obviously going to be, you don't need any sort of funding, so it's okay. You're free to use it at whatever patient spectrum you want. Maybe less than 75, you feel okay, it's not approved, but I don't care, I can use it. The patient's paying for it. You feel that he's a high risk AML. I don't have to wait for approval from any authority. That's like the positive to it. The time from decision making to initiation of therapy is not so long. Actually, in 4 days I can have venetoclax and start the patient on HMA-VEN. So
and
that's
in total in India, do you have like an idea how many patients are funded or are going to private hospitals and how many are going to government hospitals?
As I said, I can't give you the source, I can't give you the data, but it's going to be close to 70 to 80% in government versus just 20 to 30% in the private sector, because the government sector is like spread across the country in the remote parts of the country, whereas the private healthcare is basically in the second tier and the metro cities. So the number of patients coming there is not going to match the remote interior population. The rural population is entirely dependent on government healthcare. So that would be a rough approximation, close to 70% in the health government sector and around 25 to 30% would seek private healthcare.
And if you want to specialize in allogenic transplantation, we talk to people from Latin America. They may have not the same issues, but sometimes like issues that may be overlaying with you guys, especially when it comes to the difference of cities and the rural areas. I also have no idea how that may be working out in India because of the sheer size of the country. But do you also have the opportunity to do allogenic transplants off hospital, so in outpatient transplants, or do you usually do inpatient in hospital?
So at our center, we're doing 100% inpatient transplants by referral only. No outpatient transplants, unlike Mexico and stuff like that. I've been reading stuff from there, but nothing of that sort yet in India. It's all inpatients.
And in your center,
sorry.
So no, and just how many like inpatient transplant beds do you have in your center at the moment?
We've got 8 transplant beds in our center and 4 step-down units. So that's a 12-bedded unit altogether with 8 active transplants going on at a time. So maybe like that's a good mix of allo and auto and haplos. We're just starting off MUD in our center. But match sibling and haplos we've been doing for the last 15 to 20 years, 20 years actually.
20 years haplo.
Sorry?
You did haplo for 20 years now.
No, not haplo. I'm saying altogether the transplant have been functioning for 20 years at our center. And we've been doing haplos for the last 3 years, I believe. So that's maybe a year before I joined this institute. We just started haplos back then. So predominantly it was just MSDs before that. And we're yet to start MUDs in our center, probably around May this year is probably this next 15, 20 days is the plan.
Okay. And what would you say if we talk about this general healthcare system, etc., but what would you say are, in your point of view, are currently the biggest challenges you need to overcome in your, or you want to overcome, or you're targeting? What needs to change basically?
Okay. So one, the biggest issue is that all of this hem-onc or whatever, even cardiology or whatever we say is not cardiology per se, but definitely hem-onc and stuff like transplants are restricted to just metro cities and tier 1, tier 2 cities. So it's a long time before it reaches a vast patient spectrum, and a lot of patients even succumb to their illnesses even before they reach a tertiary care center via the route of referral sometimes. And plus there are a lot of social barriers. People have this, okay, if I use a donor for transplant, the donor is also not going to do well. Maybe something's going to happen to the donor. So there's a lot of inhibitions when it comes to transplant. So that needs to really be addressed. And so the patients who reach us are probably like the 10% of patients who actually need us. So that's a huge unmet need. And that's in addition to, the biology of the disease, which probably differs to a certain extent in our spectrum compared to the West. We have a much younger patient population compared to the West. So most of our illnesses, myelomas are not restricted to, 60 and above. We have a huge load of so-called young myelomas, somewhere close to 40, 45, and they have a huge life ahead of them, and young kids, and probably the only earning member of the family. So, and a lot of times, we are faced with that dilemma. Okay, I don't want to use this drug upfront, even if he's affording it, because okay, what next? He's not going to get CAR-T. He's not going to, get belantamab. He's not going to get okay, happy that he's not going to get selinexor. But what about the next line? So when we start thinking on these lines, it's, we're always on the defensive first, cannot go on the offensive even with an aggressive disease. I have a plasma cell leukemia in my ward, and, fit enough for VTD pace, but I'll be like, okay, I can't give VTD pace because what if she gets an infection? What if she doesn't have funds to, tide off the infection later? She can afford therapy now, but what if, they run out of funds? It's completely dependent on government care. She depletes the fixed amount. Okay, it's done. They have to sell off land and, arrange money. So these are the social issues which you have to keep in mind when you decide upon a plan. And I believe it's the same everywhere, but more so with us. Because every second patient is going to have that sort of issue.
I really like your if I can say that, your tone, how you say that, because it's so natural. Because my feeling, especially in Germany, I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but especially now with the CAR T cellular therapies, if you have like a healthcare system that is really built on solidarity, where everybody pays into it, then you're more vulnerable if the healthcare system breaks down because of too much money that is involved in any therapy. And this will happen basically if CAR T are rolled out in a wider range. And that's why I really like how you talk about it, because it's something that we all need to talk about. And I think we need to learn from you, because you're completely like neutral about it and just say, yeah, I can't do it, so I need to find alternatives. I really like that.
Thank you. There's no other way to work around it.
Yeah.
I mean, we were related when, we were like, okay, our patient's going to afford venetoclax. Okay, great. It's going to work well for him. We have to use that. He's definitely not going to respond to 7+3, and probably use that money to probably, allo transplant him, rather than use up the money for, daratumumab. Maybe take him up for an auto, which is going to work out better for him in the long run. So you start thinking, about how to, cut corners and save some cost, and eventually it ends up helping the patient.
True.
And in terms of like infection prophylaxis and things alongside transplants, again, I guess that's all additional costs. Are they automatic, like that you would give for everyone, or does that again depend on particular patients, and some patients may choose to forego that to try and afford the treatment itself, and then have more issues with infection and things?
We do have a lot more infections compared to the West, but our transplant unit is a HEPA filtered unit, and fortunately we're not seeing a huge, plethora of complications that we would otherwise expect, in the Indian scenario. So we're lucky actually at our center that we're not having a lot of these complications. Universal antifungal prophylaxis, we're using posaconazole. The biggest advantage in India is the availability of generics. We're not dependent on the research molecule for a long time. So once DARA goes generic, probably everyone's going to get DARA, and we'll be able to generate the biggest data, although it might not get published because we won't have the data recorded. But we would have treated more number of patients than, probably some people in the West would have. So the generics are something which are a real blessing to our population. We're using lenalidomide generic for like the past, I don't know, maybe 7-8 years, 10 years. I wasn't even into heme that long back. So thalidomide is something that has been completely phased out. It's len and pom for our myelomas. Venetoclax, we don't have a generic, but fortunately patients are affording it. A lot of other, antifungals and everything, we have generics available really soon. Dasatinib is like completely generic, is available now. So in terms of, our CML patients, they're able to afford everything. We have generic ponatinib as well. So that really helps, brings down the cost a lot. And fortunately, that's the only way our patients are able to afford those drugs. Otherwise, there's no way that they'll be able to afford the research molecule for longer than 2 months.
I'm repeating myself, but I really like how you talk about it, because when in Europe, or maybe even in the US, you always hear like generics is something like a obscure thingy, and yeah, but let's face it, without generics, how do you think the world works. Yeah. I really like that. What is it? What's about donors in India? Where do the donors come from? Do you have most of the donors come from within India, or do you have knowledge of that?
You're talking of mud donors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a registry, the Datri. So we have a lot of Indian donors as well registered. And we have a lot of donors from across the borders as well, and even from the West. So that's not so much of an issue. As I said, we've not done a lot of muds. I have not done a single mud in my 3 years as a heme resident. So that's not something that I'll be really confident commenting upon. But haplos and stuff is like predominantly, the standard right now for us. Not so much into muds at our center, so not really aware of that.
Wow. And I guess it's more probably in the ped setting. There are a lot of transplants, I think, from colleagues who I've worked with who have come from India and things. There's a lot of like transplant for hemoglobinopathies done in centers in India. Does that translate at all? Do you do any in adults, or is that all purely pediatric?
So yeah, we do thalassemia transplants at our center. Over the last, I've been a part of 4 thalassemia patients who've been transplanted, mostly in like Pesaro grade 2, grade 3, sometimes even grade 3. I mean, you have to deal with it. They're arranging money, they progress, and they've been transplanted, not enough money for chelation at times. But fortunately, most of our patients have been grade 2 with decent outcomes with FTT. So working fine.
What was the biggest challenge, or what changed with the COVID pandemic? How are you affected by it right now? How are hospitals affected by it right now?
Oh, it's been huge. I mean, the sheer numbers again have contributed to a lot of, mortality has been quite high. I mean, fortunately, the center where I'm working at, we had a dedicated COVID hospital, which was built up in no time, maybe just like 15 days of the start of pandemic in 2020. We had the hospital up and running. So we converted the entire trauma center into a hospital. So initial first wave, we didn't have a lot of deaths, but the second wave was crazy. The Delta wave was really crazy. But I think for our patients, it was more of, like missing out on their appointments, and, the OPDs being shut, the doctors being shunted to COVID care. So it was more like a collateral damage rather than a direct damage. We did see a lot of patients coming in with advanced stage diseases because the referral doctors were like, late to refer, or probably, they were busy with COVID, and the patients also ignored because, they needed a COVID test or an RT-PCR. But the vaccine rollout has been amazing. I mean, post 2021, so yesterday we crossed the 1 billion vaccination mark in India. I'm sure you're aware of that. So the numbers, and it's actually translated on, the ground level. I mean, every patient, fortunately, that I've interacted with has been fully vaccinated, has had these questions, should I get vaccinated? Can I get vaccinated? Rather than, oh, I don't want to get vaccinated. The hesitancy for us has been really low in our patient population. And that's been a real plus for us. I mean, the vaccine has saved people. I mean, we're beyond that phase of denying, okay, is it going to work, is it not going to work? So I mean, now it's kind of, behind us, and we're kind of back to, full swing. Probably sometime in Jan this year is when we got back to our routine OPD numbers and not restricting any numbers because of the COVID pandemic. And the inpatients have been almost close to 5 to 10 inpatients with COVID right now. So it's a huge reduction compared to what we had. We had 300 inpatients in the COVID hospital. Now we've got 5 or 10. So the numbers have definitely gone down, and things are getting back to normal, fortunately. Can't, wait to travel now.
And the vaccinations are all produced by you guys in India, right? So you didn't import anything from?
No. The Serum Institute of India, the Shadox vaccine, the Oxford, but it's manufactured in India by the Serum Institute at Pune. So that's what we are predominantly using.
Okay. And what are the numbers now? Are you completely free to travel without any masking, or what's the situation at the moment?
So it's again very specific to each state in the country. And again, within the state, in each district and each hospital has its own rules. So in our hospital, patients have to be universally masked if possible. Doctors are definitely masked. And I prefer it that way. I mean, we're dealing with like usually immunocompromised patients, and I don't want to, affect them in any sort of way, and them affect the other patients in any sort of way. So it's better we're all masked, and it's the patients are quite comfortable because our hemonc kids were anyway so comfortable with masking. They were like, okay, now everyone's masking. So I had a patient come up to me and be like, okay, why is everyone wearing a mask now? I thought it was only for me. And this was early during the COVID pandemic. So little kid had no idea.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
But it's when we come back to you, maybe, because I just need to say this. I'm quite impressed by how comfortable and how self-conscious you talk, and you just share your knowledge online, etc. What in your training, during your current career, what do you think influenced you? Did you have a mentor, or what was it that kept you going?
Yeah, so had like a real good attending to work with out here in my center. I mean, someone with a knowledge pool in each of their diseases that they specialize in. We've got one of our consultants is a pediatrician who is big time into transplants. Another one is into myeloma. So they're all there to help us out each time, and it's like baby steps in the world for me right now. Teaching online is not something which I do to teach per se. It's because if I put it out there, it's it's for my learning. I mean, definitely the comments are going to teach me more than I'm going to teach the world. I mean, it's not about teaching. I'm too young to be doing that, but I believe that it's always mutual. I mean, I've learned so many things from Aaron Goodman and Mani across in the West, who I've connected with on Twitter, and it's been such a useful platform for me. And with respect to fellowship applications for with the Princess Margaret thing altogether, everything's just through Twitter. I've been really blessed to connect with really good people on Twitter, like you included. I mean, I'm so glad that you approached me for this podcast. It's only through that medium that we've connected.
Yeah.
And is there a trainee community within India? Is there a formal trainee community of any kind, or?
It's not formal. It's like an informal kind of a trainee committee.
Yeah.
We don't have like a formal working unit kind of a thing. It's more so just like on an interactive basis.
Should we change that?
Oh, we should. I'd love to.
Yeah, because I'm just it's for me, I don't know what the feeling for Claire is every time we, that's why I wanted to do this podcast, because the one thing is to follow someone online and see how they work. The other thing is to really talk to them and feel the insecurities oneself has when I ask questions. And I don't want to tip on anybody's toes, because I don't know much about the country, because I've never been there. And it's just a blessing to hear these differences. I really love this, because I think we can learn so much more and thereby change something. And I think the expression you just had about how you need to approach things, I think we need to approach these things as well in the same with the same style. And that's why I would love to collaborate more actively and get to know more about India, how it works, the realities, differences, etc.
Oh, I'd love to show you around if COVID permits and you plan to visit someday.
Claire, let's book something.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been great. We've learned like so much about how, and I think one thing that strikes us every time we do a podcast, particularly with people working in like different settings, is just how it's the same thing. Like transplant is the same thing, but it's just so different in all of these different locations.
What would you if there is a thing you don't have at the moment in India, what would that be you wished for free?
More transplant centers. and doctors with an adequate training in transplant. I mean, just making centers would not be enough. I mean, given the population, the ratio is like, really highly skewed in the negative side. So we really need more hem-onc doctors and people with, basic training in hematology, if not transplanters, definitely more hematologists to begin with. I mean, it's a really growing field. It's really booming in the country. A lot more institutes have now started offering fellowships in hematology. So it's growing, but you'll be surprised at the numbers. So with this huge population, we just produce close to 80 hematologists a year.
What?
Wow.
Did you say 80?
Yeah, 80.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, definitely. There's work to be done, I guess, in enticing people to choose hematology.
Okay. And what do you think is the reason for that?
As I said, not too many mentors, right? So not too many people who trained in hematology. The same number for cardiology would be somewhere close to 800. So that's 10 times more. Still not enough. Still not enough. I'm not saying 800 is enough, but 80 is definitely not enough. We don't have so many places offering fellowships in hematology. So 5 years, back, we just had 4 or 5 centers in the entire country which were offering a dedicated fellowship in hematology. That, when I say dedicated fellowship, I mean 3 years of DM or the equivalent. So that was just close to 40 seats, and now we've doubled up in the last 3 years. So positive signs, but yet to reach statistical significance.
And do you think that's a problem? Like, it could be due to the lack of centers and specific training that fellows from India end up going abroad and then potentially staying there, staying be it in the States, be it in Europe, be it somewhere else. Do you think Indian trainees who are interested and go elsewhere, then they may not necessarily return?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite a big issue. It is quite a big an issue. I mean, a lot of my senior colleagues have emigrated, and that's obviously not working out well for the country when it comes to bringing back and applying the training that they've received in the West. Yeah, that has been an issue, but with the growing number of trainees, I believe that's probably going to just take things in the positive direction, and maybe we have more people who stay back in the country, or come back and get advanced training abroad and come back and use it on the population and serve the population of the country. And because that's really required, there's a lot of people who are not served yet, and there's a lot of population who's in need of good hematologists and transplanters per se. Very few number of transplants even today, even autologous transplants. Allogenic would be even lesser, but we're heading there, definitely moving ahead in the right direction.
And is it because of earnings? Is this a financial issue that people think they earn more money abroad, or
it's not only that. I mean, it's better training, and at times slightly more comfortable life maybe. I mean, I'm yet to go check that side out, so probably when we connect maybe in a year and a half again, I'll have seen both the sides, so might be in a slightly better position to answer that. I don't know what the senior colleagues are choosing, but a lot of them have come back to India, and a lot of them are translating that into patient care. So that's a huge positive sign, and I intend to do the same. I mean, not stay back abroad and try and bring it to the country.
Yeah. So one key point we will follow up on is how we could collaborate or bring things forward. I think we definitely need to do that, and because the story you are telling in India for me is a completely positive one, and I don't know why people. It's the same with unfortunately now in Ukraine has a big problem, but there was also the conversation we had in Ukraine is that there are countries like India or Ukraine or Latin American countries who are really progressing, and we need to strengthen this development in order to get a stable growth all over the world, and not get this kind of echo chamber thinking, okay, I just want to do myself my little stem cell transplant unit, because stem cell transplant, I think for me per se, is just a solidarity thing, because without donors you're nothing.
Yeah, I think like sharing that enthusiasm, like providing free resources for people, and just trying to like have more and more people find out a bit on what it's about, and the vast spectrum within it as well. There's so many different aspects of transplant. Hopefully it'll only be something that continues to grow and grow and become more accessible for the majority of people, as opposed to the few people who currently seem to have access globally at the moment.
Yeah. What would you say, maybe at the end, what would you say to, or how would you like to get more people emotionally, what was it, into stem cell transplant or hematology in general?
It's a tough one. How do I get people into hematology? Probably disseminate the little knowledge that I've accumulated over the past 3 years. Tell them that it's, like close to science fiction. Probably works for med students. And a lot of people have approached me on Twitter DM, like, how's the field like, and what's the scope like, and what are the working hours, what do you deal with, what's the kind of patient spectrum that you deal with, are heme malignancies curable, and med students asking that. So that's something that's going to pique people's interest in the field, because what we do as hematologists is, as Aaron Goodman says on Twitter, it is science fiction. I mean, stem cell transplants, CAR-T is something that's it's really intriguing, and that's something that's really close to my heart, and I love doing that. I mean, I'm not a transplanter yet, and nowhere close to being a transplanter as of today. But hematology, even excluding transplants, it's quite wonderful. I mean, it's extremely gratifying to treat these malignancies, because unlike solid malignancies, the kind of gratification that you get treating heme malignancies, pediatric patients walking in a moribund state and going back, playing with their toys, is something like really gratifying. Going to the ward each day, seeing these kids, recover day by day, and logging their journey. I mean, that's enough to get anyone interested in it. So that's the kind of stories I would like to share with my junior colleagues in med school. Probably help them get interested in the field, tell them that it's not all depressing, and cancers are not like a dead end, and we've come a long way. I mean, if you take the example of, I always give the classic example of AML. I mean, moving from 7+3 to how many 10 new approvals in the last 3 years, 4 years. So that's the pace at which hematology is growing. I believe, I don't think any other subspecialty has seen that sort of massive growth.
Yeah, and that's why I said emotionally, because you and I, we share like somehow a same experience, and I know a lot of people who got into hematology because of this first contact with stem cell transplant, and we're just like, what, there is something and this works, okay, what? But I think we need, and that's what you do, we need to enforce this feeling upon people to understand. And with cellular therapies now, or with new immunotherapy, I think we just like copy this feeling from stem cell transplant into the non-transplant setting. And I think that's why the community is so active and so connected. I believe there, for instance, on Twitter or other platforms, no other field within medicine is so connected as hematologists at the moment. And so there must be something to it. And yeah, that's why I really like how you talk about it. And I think we need to put it out there and to build on that, definitely.
Yeah, heme Twitter is something which is like, unifying. I mean, there's no way I would have met so many people had it not been for Twitter. So yeah, I mean, we really need to. I'm glad that, you guys want to reach out, and I'll be more than happy to collaborate on any sort of issues. So it's really help us. And I mean, likewise.
So
Okay.
if you don't have any questions to us at the end, we would like to thank you for your time, for your response. And I personally would love to collaborate in the future, to keep in contact, to learn from one another, and yeah, to just spread the word.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot to be done.
Thanks so much, guys. I had one question. How does the the hematology training work in let's say Germany and the UK, Claire? Because that's something that I have not got much of an idea about. How do you guys go about it?
So in terms of UK, we obviously have medical school, 5 years, 6 years, depending on where people go. And then we have 2 years, which we call foundation years. And so those foundation years, people generally rotate around 6 or 7 different specialties, often do like 4-month blocks, mixture of medicine, surgery, A&E, like a bit of a mixed bag. You can kind of select your rotations depending on what you think you might be interested in. And then at that point, you decide whether you go into either like general practice, you can go in then, you can go into core medical training, core surgical training, or if you want to do something like pediatrics, obs and gynae, at those points, you can specialize there. And then for hematology, so I came to hematology from a pediatric background. I mean, I'm sure I must have done hematology at medical school, but I'm not going to lie, I don't really remember it. I stumbled upon hematology as a second-year pediatric trainee. I worked on the bone marrow transplant unit in Manchester Children's and just absolutely loved it. Like, loved the science behind it, and actually I mean, the first month I spent time trying to just work out what all the different acronyms meant and what these diseases that often I'd never heard of were. But when you start to read more and understand more about it and actually see the difference that it makes, I decided actually, yeah, and then explored a bit more. And you apply for hematology after you've done like your core exam. So you either do it in core medicine from adult medicine if you've gone into that, or your like core pediatric exams, and then you apply. And then hematology training itself is 5 years in the UK. So you need to get your FRC path qualification as part of that. And you do a bit of you rotate through different specialties. So you'll spend some time in the bigger university hospitals with access to transplant CAR-T. You'll do a bit of hemostasis and thrombosis, you'll do clotting, and then there's a big lab component as well, because in the UK, we have to pass the pathology exams, and so you have to be competent in diagnosing things on blood films, bone marrows, and things like that.
Yeah, and in Germany, it's completely different. Well, so in Germany, you do 6 years of medical school, and in the last year, final year of medical school, you do 3 months of internal medicine, like in rotation, 3 months of surgery, and 3 months as an elective. And there you can choose from pediatrics to urology, but hematology is part of internal medicine, so you can choose that. And then you have, after that, you have 6 years of medical training, we call that. And this is where you choose surgery or urology or neurology and internal medicine, for instance. And hematology, oncology is also part of internal medicine. And only like in the final process of accreditation, you must do certain rotations within hematology and oncology. So you need to visit patients with pancreatic cancer, etc., breast cancer even, which is, yeah, not, I think, which keeps many young physicians from hematology. And I think maybe that was a thing that you also pointed to, is that the structure doesn't really cope with the development of hematology. I think in most countries, and especially in Europe, hematology needs to be its own, what is it called, faculty or education platform. It isn't in Germany, and that's why I think that's a problem. And along the way, you then simply lose the people who then go to stem cell transplant, because stem cell transplant is an elective during hematology oncology. You don't need to do that. Only if you want to work on a stem cell transplant unit, you need to do that. And the thing that I do now, I'm in second year of medical training, and I started with stem cell transplant. I don't know one other person in Germany that does that, but simply because I had the personal experience before that. Yeah.
I think as well, hematology and particularly transplant and well, every aspect of hematology. So even with all the new clotting medicines and things, it's becoming so niche and it's advancing at such a rate that it's becoming impossible for people to do hematology, because you can't be competent in every aspect because there's just so much. I think more and more, and particularly in the UK, there's talk of things moving and the curriculum changing so that people do subspecialize earlier. So you'll do a few years of sort of like core hematology, but then ultimately you'll spend more time in your subspecialty, whether you want to be a transplanter, whether you want to go into clotting, whether you want to be in the lab diagnostic side. Because I think the way that the world's growing and the hematology field is expanding, it'll just be impossible for people to stay up to date and be able to give appropriate advice about each different aspect.
It's quite overwhelming, the kind of, the papers that are being published each day. It's impossible to keep up with everything. True. Yeah. I have sit exams in like the next 3 months, and I'm at the face of it. I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to know this as well. Okay, this as well. Okay, I can't keep up with this.
Yeah, it's like so as part of our exams, I sat my last exams back in October 2020. So that was the last time I had to do any adult hematology, think about myeloma. And now I see people on Twitter talking about, I haven't got a clue, CAR T for myeloma.
My colleague is a pediatrician, and it's his worst nightmare, going to that Friday OPD with 200 odd myeloma patients. He's like, okay, Nihar, what am I supposed to do? I mean, it's so far away from what I've trained during my residency days and seeing these patients. Yeah, I get your point. I'd be that uncomfortable around kids like 3 months old and 4 months old. I'm like, okay, you're crying. I don't understand why you're crying. What's wrong with you?
I think it's quite, for me, it's quite odd to see that you need to do both, because I would have the same experiences. If I see a child, I would, I don't know, cry myself and run away. I don't know.
Yeah, I think if there's any consolation, I think it's probably worse for the adult trainees who do have to spend a little bit of time in the pediatric center. Yeah. At least I did do adult medicine in those like two foundation years, and medical school is largely more adult focused, I suppose. But yeah, when suddenly the only children you'll deal with might be the hemonc and transplant kids, then it does seem quite unfair.
And Nico, one last question, and to you as well, Claire. What are the kind of transplant numbers that your centers are offering? I mean, in a month, in a year, or however you want to put it.
So I'm in probably the second biggest pediatric transplant centre in the UK, here in Manchester, and I think we do about 60 allografts or so, 60 including CAR T and gene therapy per year.
Okay.
About that.
And I hope other EBMT centers won't kill me for that, but I think we are the biggest center in Europe. And
bold statement.
Yeah. No, I think that's the case, I believe. We do basically 230 allo transplants, and about not that many auto transplant, 30 to 40, I guess, in a year. and then comes cellular therapy, CAR T cells. We do now about I think 40 to 50. But what I do know and what I quite emotional about is that we are the biggest center for myelofibrosis in the world. I just had looked through data from our centers and other centers around the world, and we are the biggest in that scenario. So that's true. For the EVMT, I hope it's true, but maybe is a preliminary information. So don't hold me too tight on that.
When you start getting trolled about that later.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Really love to talk to you, and I really would be happy to just use that as a start for continuous communication, collaboration, and I think Claire and I just need to plan our visit maybe sometime this year. I don't know. No, but really would love to keep on going together.
Thank you so much, guys. It's really been awesome. Thanks for having me over.
No, thank you. Have a good Sunday.
Wish you all the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sunday evening. Sorry, my Sunday is ending.
Oh no. Yeah, it's 10. Oh
10. It's
okay.
11 now.
Oh yeah.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. So sorry.
No, not a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Busy week ahead.
Have a
Thanks,
good
guys.
night then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Sunday. Bye-bye. Take care.